Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to quickly distill crucial insights for you so you're instantly up to speed. Today's topic is definitely a hot one: standardizing private sector salaries in the Philippines. And it really hits close to home for our channel, AI-deas. We're part of the Good Business podcast, powered by the PHINMA-DLSU Center for Business and Society. Our whole mission is exploring, business as a force for good.
Absolutely, and getting to the heart of complex issues efficiently is part of that. It's worth noting this deep dive uses AI synthesis, specifically through Notebook LM. It helps us process dense material like public policy docs really fast. The main source we're unpacking today is a very insightful article. It's from the Managing for Society column in the Manila Times. The title is Salary Standardization in the Private Sector.
Right. Now, standardization itself, that's not new, is it? We use the public sector all the time. It's kind of the foundation for civil service pay, keeps things consistent, helps retain talent in government.
Exactly. But the big question the article tackles is, should we, or rather can we, apply that same fairly rigid framework to the private sector? I mean, the private market is incredibly diverse, very competitive.
That's the core mission for us today, then, to really dissect this tension. You've got the push for wage equity on one side and the need for economic flexibility, especially for businesses, on the other.
Yeah, it's a balancing act. How do you tackle those huge wage gaps and inequality without, stifling businesses, especially the small and medium ones, or even harming the wider economy? So maybe let's start with the pro side. Why are people pushing for this?
Well, the biggest driver, unsurprisingly, is fairness. It's seen as the most direct way to shrink those wage gaps. We're talking gender gaps, but also significantly those massive regional pay differences.
Oh, yeah. That regional point comes up strongly in the source. It really highlights how places like Metro Manila just naturally pay way more than rural areas. It's driven by, concentrated economic activity, higher cost of living, all that.
Right. So standardization, at least in theory, would kind of force more equitable pay across the board, regardless of location.
It aims for consistency.
And tied to that is worker welfare. The idea is, look, if pay is consistent, standardized, workers get more security, especially those in lower wage jobs. They can actually understand their earning potential. That builds trust, right?
Definitely. And it promotes consistency in how companies handle pay. And if you zoom out a bit, proponents see real economic benefits, assuming it's done right. By ensuring fairer pay, it could potentially lift living standards, maybe even make a dent in poverty rates, particularly in those less developed regions. It could stimulate local spending.
But it's not just about putting more money in people's pockets for spending, though that's part of it. The source makes a more strategic argument, too. It says standardization actually forces a change in how businesses operate.
Exactly. That's a key insight. It shifts the focus from just suppressing labor costs. Because, you can't compete just on having the lowest wages anymore if there's a standard. So instead, businesses are kind of pushed towards investing in genuine productivity improvements, things like better processes, technology, innovation, because they need to justify those potentially higher operating costs.
So it's an incentive to move up the value chain, essentially. Get away from relying solely on cheap labor models.
Precisely. A nudge for the whole business community.
Okay, so those fairness and productivity arguments, they sound compelling.
Yeah.
But then you immediately bump up against the messy reality of the Philippine business landscape. It's incredibly varied.
And that's the crux of the challenge, isn't it? Can one single pay framework really work for everyone? You've got tech companies, BPOs, agriculture, manufacturing. I mean, they all have totally different business models.
Different revenue streams, labor needs, cost structures.
Right. A uniform approach could really risk hurting that flexibility, that ability to adapt, which is crucial.
And if we're talking about disruption, we absolutely have to focus on the SMEs, the small and medium enterprises.
Yeah, they're always called the backbone of the economy, and for good reason. But they often run on, pretty thin margins.
The source is quite clear on this. If standardized wages are set too high for them, they could really struggle.
And the fallout from that struggle, it's not pretty. Could mean less hiring, layoffs.
Or even businesses closing down entirely.
Which ironically hurts the very low-wage workers the policy aims to protect. You could end up with a net negative impact.
It's that classic market disruption problem. You're essentially intervening in how wages are normally set, by supply, demand, productivity, competition.
Correct. And you risk falling into what economists sometimes call the wage floor trap.
Yeah.
Set the standard wage too high, you might actually reduce demand for low-skilled workers. Result, more unemployment among the most vulnerable.
But set it too low.
And you haven't really tackled inequality, have you? Plus, you don't give workers much incentive to upskill or improve, which limits long-term growth.
And I wanted to loop back to something you mentioned earlier, labor mobility. The Force argues standardization could actually hinder that by sort of flattening those wage signals, the signs that tell workers, hey, you can earn more over here, or your skills are really needed in this sector.
That's a significant point. If those signals are dampened, you can get mismatches. Labor supply doesn't flow where demand is highest. That's a drag on efficiency. Plus, think about motivation. If the chances of earning significantly more are capped or reduced by standardization, why would workers invest heavily in learning new skills, getting more education? It could slow down that vital upskilling process.
And the complexity doesn't stop there. Think about specific sectors. Maybe a high-tech industry struggles to attract top global talent if the standardized wage isn't competitive enough internationally.
Right. While on the other hand, a sector like agriculture, which might be vital but less profitable, could find even a moderate standardized wage too high to sustain.
There's also the whole foreign investment angle to consider. This comes up too.
Oh, definitely. The Philippines attracts a lot of multinational companies, right?
Yeah.
Especially in manufacturing and, of course, the huge BPO sector. And a big part of that attraction, let's be honest, is the cost-competitive labor market.
So if you bring in really rigid wage rules,
You risk scaring off those potential investors. They might look elsewhere.
which means lost jobs, maybe even capital flight, not something you want in a developing economy.
And there's another risk layered on top. Automation.
Ah, yes. Businesses facing higher mandated labor costs might just say, okay, time to invest more heavily in machines, or...
Or even worse, perhaps, outsource the jobs to another country where costs are even lower.
So trying to help could inadvertently worsen unemployment and inequality through these other channels.
It's a real tightrope walk.
Okay, so it's clear there's a strong case for trying to achieve more equity, but also some really serious economic warnings about doing it through rigid standardization. This definitely screams for nuance, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You can't just be a simple yes or no.
Exactly what the source suggests. A flexible approach seems much more promising than a one-size-fits-all mandate. Maybe the goal shouldn't be forcing uniform pay everywhere, but ensuring uniform fairness in how pay is determined while letting the market adapt.
All right, so let's unpack some of those alternative strategies mentioned. The first one focuses on strengthening pay equity laws. So this shifts the focus from setting the actual wage number to policing the process of how companies decide compensation.
Yes, and this is quite clever, I think. It means things like requiring companies to conduct wage audits, pushing for transparency in their pay structures, actively enforcing rules against discriminatory practices based on gender, region, whatever.
So you attack the bias, which is a big source of inequality.
Right, without imposing that kind of structural rigidity that could hurt otherwise viable businesses or slow down adaptation. You target the unfairness, not necessarily the market rate itself.
Okay, strategy 2. Customized standards. This sounds like acknowledging the diversity we talked about.
Pretty much. Instead of one national rule for the private sector, maybe you have standards that vary by region or even by industry, tailored to local economic realities, local costs of living.
So maybe Metro Manila has a higher standard reflecting its costs.
While maybe a rural agricultural area has a different standard that makes sense for its local economy, it allows for that complexity.
Keeps businesses viable locally, keeps regions competitive, but still aims for fairness relative to local conditions. And the third alternative mentioned is about empowering workers directly, strengthening collective bargaining, encouraging trade unions.
Yeah, this leans more on negotiation to achieve fair outcomes. Rather than the government setting every single wage, you create an environment where workers, through unions or collective action, can negotiate for better wages and benefits themselves.
Which maintains business flexibility because the outcome depends on the specific company's situation and productivity.
Exactly. It's more of a market-driven approach to addressing inequality, assuming you have mechanisms to support unionization where it's weak, of course. It helps align pay with both what the company can afford and what workers need.
Okay, so putting it all together, you really see the challenge. That dual promise equity, better worker welfare versus the very real risks, market disruption, scaring off investment.
Yeah, and if you step back and look at the whole picture presented in the source, maybe the deepest insight isn't about finding the perfect wage number. Perhaps true standardization, or the positive goal of it, is less about a fixed number and more about forcing accountability. specifically through transparency.
That's an interesting angle. So that leads us to our final, maybe provocative thought for you, the listener. What if the main policy lever wasn't setting wages, but simply mandating radical wage transparency? Imagine if all companies had to publish detailed, non-discriminatory pay structures. How might that alone shift the power dynamics? Could it reduce inequality significantly, even without the government fixing a single peso amount for wages?
Something to think about.
Definitely something to mull over. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this gives you a much clearer picture of this really critical debate. And let's close with that key takeaway from the material we looked at today. A flexible, nuanced approach can foster a fairer labor market and support sustainable economic growth.